Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today, Jim McCormick. He's the best-selling author of several books, including The First Time Manager and The Power of Risk. He's also a professional skydiver with 18 world records and founder of the Research Institute of Risk Intelligence. Jim, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Jacob. Thank you.
All right, so I was doing a little bit of a snooping online to see what I could find about you. And so one of the things that I learned, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, you served 3 years under the Reagan administration?
That's correct. From 81 to 84, I had the privilege of being a member of the Reagan administration as a political appointee. It was an extraordinary experience.
Can you share a little bit about what that was like? I mean, did you get a chance to meet President Reagan several times? I mean, any of those behind the scenes stories, people always love that.
Well, it was a heady time because it represented a real shift in the political environment in Washington. You know, we'd come out of some dark times with Watergate and some challenges with various, the energy crisis and stuff like that. And so it was a bright, new, exciting time, and we knew that we had a limited amount of time to try to make an impact, and we had a lot of very ambitious goals. Some were achieved, some not so much. But there were some intriguing experiences like one of the ones that very much came to mind was when I would travel with the Secretary of Energy. I was at the Department of Energy, and among other things, I was his aide when he was traveling. And one evening he said, "You know, Jim," he said, "when the president called me and told me to come up here and see if I could help out," he said, "I anticipated that most of our challenges and difficulties would come from people on the other side of the aisle. I had
Mm.
no idea that most of our difficulties would be from people within." And that just speaks to the very intense political nature of being in Washington. I always equated Washington to a rat maze with a lot of exceedingly ambitious rats, and more than happy to do whatever's necessary so that they prevail and they get the cheese.
How did you get connected with the Reagan administration?
I had some family connections that allowed me to at least get an opportunity to interview. The way the system worked at that time, I don't have any idea how it works today, but you'd have to come in through the White House personnel office, and they basically, when each administration comes in, you've got 6,000 slots to fill. So it's an extremely small number of positions that you can use to try to direct the bureaucracy and the government agencies. So it's basically you're just replacing the very senior managers and hoping that you can make that work. Well, when you look at the tiers, there's the secretaries and the Senate confirmed people, and then there's the people who are not Senate confirmed. That's the level I was at, and you are selected with the approval of the administrator, the secretary of your agency. So they know they have a finite number of these slots. They're referred to as Schedule C slots, and they're highly sought after as well you can imagine. So what happens is you go in through the White House personnel office, and they give you a thumbs up, thumbs down. And if you pass that, and there's got to be some political connections and stuff like that, you're involved in the campaign or some other scenario, then they put you on what I call the personnel mill, and they send you out to the various departments because an assistant secretary at, say, Defense or State or Transportation would say, "I'm looking for somebody to be my special assistant." That's the level I was at. "Who do you got?" And they'll send 3 or 4 people over, and you interview with them and see if they like you. And so I connected with a guy at Energy, and that worked out to be a great position. And ultimately, my final position, I was the first non-attorney in the history of the Department of Energy to be special assistant to the general counsel, which was a truly unique
Mm.
opportunity. I traveled with the secretary. I was involved in a lot of legislation. We were working on deregulating natural gas, which we did successfully ultimately, which is why it flows in such abundance today. It was an exciting time, and I always equated it was equivalent of getting a master's in political science.
Yeah, I bet. And you probably saw a lot of the cool behind the scenes stuff as far as how decisions are made, how they talk about risk, how they, I don't know, how they deal with conflict, people debating, which I'm sure is probably a lot of fun and very interesting.
Yeah, one more quick story. I was walking out of the West Wing of the White House one afternoon. I was over in the cabinet room setting up for the secretary. He's going to do a presentation, and and I ran into Helen Thomas. You may remember her. She was an AP reporter. You always sat in the front row at the White House briefings for many, many years. And she says, "Oh, hello, how are you?" Now here, I'm this like 26-year-old kid, in a three-piece suit. And she says, "Well, how are you?" I said, "Well, I'm fine. It's nice to meet you." She said, "So what have you been working on today?" I thought, she is one clever gal. She wanted to know what I was up to because she figured if there's some kid running around at a fast pace setting up for a cabinet meeting, she needed to know about it.
Very sneaky. Yeah, you got to be careful out there, man. They'll friendly conversations turn into stories on the front page.
One other quick comment. One time I had a businessman who had gone over to China with President Nixon to kind of revisit his path. He introduced me to a guy at the Chinese embassy. He said, "You guys should really meet." He was a guy that was on the trip with him, really a nice guy, blah, blah, blah. So we went to, one Saturday morning, we went to breakfast. And then I got back and to the office Monday morning. I go, shoot, I just went to breakfast with somebody from the Chinese embassy. I need to talk to our security people and report that. I didn't even think through the fact this is exactly what they look for when they're recruiting people.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so you went from there, and then how did you get into skydiving? So 18 world records in skydiving.
As of today, I have 5,590 skydives. I did 15 over the course of the weekend.
Oh my God.
Skydiving was a goal that I established as an 18-year-old, and it was a fascination that started from a book I read in childhood. I finally had the ability to execute on that goal when I was 32 years old. And the only reason I waited is, one, it was expensive, and two, I didn't know how to go about it. Back then there wasn't an internet, and I didn't really want to open the yellow pages and go to Acme Skydiving. So I was looking for somebody to refer me, and ultimately I had a colleague that turns out he was an active skydiver, and he said, these are the people you should work with. And that worked out quite well with the intent of only doing a single skydive. Never intended for it to become a lifelong activity. Loved it, did a second jump the same day, never done fewer than 100 in a year, and it's become profoundly significant in my life. And the segue into my fascination with studying and researching risk.
Do you still do it?
Oh yeah.
You still skydive to this day?
I did 15 jumps this weekend.
Wow. 15 jumps just this weekend?
Yeah, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. With a team down in Dallas, and we created some really spectacular formations. There's a team from around the country that gets together every year, the first weekend in August.
Have you ever had any close calls with?
Yes. Yeah.
You have?
I think, well, I've used my reserve parachute 6 times, out of almost 6,000 jumps. I think the most dangerous thing that we do is when I'm jumping with a large team or even smaller teams, the first 10 or 15 seconds after we open a parachute, things are pretty chaotic because you may not be going the same direction that you were headed when you initiated your opening. So cross traffic is a very real issue. And so until you sort things out with you and everybody else, you're in a very tenuous and frightening scenario, and canopies can come together. And the most challenge, the closest I've come to serious injury in the sport has been upon opening when canopies are heading towards one another.
So you've had that happen where your canopies actually hit?
I have not had that's called a canopy collision. I have not had a canopy collision. I have had some close calls, which is why during the opening process, we put our hands up on our risers so that we can take immediate evasive action as needed.
Interesting. Well, 6 times for the reserve parachute, probably 6 times too many, but you still keep going out there.
Well, but think about this. I've had to use my reserve about out of every 1,000 jumps. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
That means that the technology and the products are really amazingly reliable. But obviously, everything. There's a lot of factors that people maybe aren't aware of when you talk about the risk of skydiving. Some people don't know you have to have 2 parachutes. That's a law requirement in federal aviation regulations. If you jump out of a plane, you have to have a main and a reserve. The reserve has to be inspected and repacked every 180 days by somebody who's licensed by the federal government to do that, an FAA licensed parachute rigger. They take it out, inspect it, repack it, seal it. I have to document that all that has taken place whenever I go someplace to jump, like this last weekend down in Dallas. We have a lot of technology. We have digital altimeters that tell us our altitude within 100 feet of accuracy when we're in free fall, when we're moving 120 miles an hour. That's pretty amazing. It tells us our altitude within 10 feet of accuracy when we're under canopy. It gives us our time of exit, our altitude of exit, our speeds in free fall, our opening altitudes. All that data can be downloaded into my laptop. We have audible altimeters in addition that are mounted in our full face helmets that are by our ears that we set for different tones, different durations, different altitudes. It's a backup. So there's a ton of things that we do to make the process safe. A lot of orchestration, a lot of planning, and a lot of then careful execution.
What's the altitude you usually jump from?
Well, standard jump altitude is 12,500 feet. Our jumps this last weekend were from 16,000 feet. The largest formation I've done was a 400. It's a world record. We jumped from 26,500 feet. And personally, I've jumped from as high as 31,000 feet.
30. Okay, so this is altitude. This is where planes are flying at that point.
Correct. It's very comforting to look out the window and know I can make this work.
Jeez. That's intense stuff. Okay, so I mean the transition and how you got involved in risk after hearing the stuff about skydiving, that connection there makes a lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit about risk.
Well, the transition started because when I was first thinking I wanted to maybe skydive more than once or twice, I was intrigued as to why people would do this. Because Jacob, let's be honest, there is nothing instinctively that says it's a good idea to jump out of a plane when it's not on the ground.
Yes, correct.
But see, that's where part of the power of the experience, because it is so instinctively disquieting. Doing it anyways has the potential to be a growth experience. But what I would say is, most people have never skydived, never will. But most of us, at various times in our lives, have done something that made us very uncomfortable. But we did it anyway. And I would tell you that's where a lot of our personal growth comes from. But then that led to, why do people jump? There's research that was done on the skydiving community, a lot of high initiative individuals, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people highly educated. You might be surprised. These aren't a bunch of dirt bags. These are a bunch of people that, I was on a team 2 years ago down in Houston, team of 20. We had 2 physicians, both emergency room physicians. That probably doesn't surprise you. Had an attorney who was a litigator. We had a guy who was on partner track for McKinsey and Company. I mean, we're talking about some high-end individuals, but people who like to challenge themselves. And so then that led to, well, why do we take risks? Where does it fit in our lives? To what extent is our risk inclination indicative of what we can accomplish? Otherwise stated, is a high risk inclination innately positive, or is a low risk inclination in any way negative? The answer is no to both. It's just a matter of how we deploy them and how we manage them. And then that led to looking at organizations and saying, is there such thing within an organization as an ideal risk posture that will serve them well? And then beyond that, what are the implications? If we can deploy risk, and I'm using the word deploy intentionally, deploy risk successfully within an organization, where does it take us? And the answer is improved organizational agility and ability to respond effectively to changes in the marketplace and changes in the competitive environment, increased levels of initiative, fewer decisions being unnecessarily escalated, increased levels of innovation, which is huge. The only way you're going to get the innovation that's going to allow an organization to remain competitive or bolster the competitive advantages through innovation, and then the growth. But let's go back to the innovation, because it's so much related to risk. The bottom line is this: not every risk, not every innovation initiative is going to work. And until an organization can say, we will embrace the uncertain and undesired outcomes, knowing that as part of the price of the positive outcomes, they're going to be at a significant disadvantage.
So let's start high level, because it's an interesting transition. I mean, every organization today, every business leader is thinking about risk, right? What do I invest in? What do I not? Especially when we talk about AI. What are the pros and cons? What are the risks there? I mean, but there's risks to anything and everything. There's risks to going outside in the morning, right? There's risks to getting in your car. So it seems like risk is a natural part of life, but there are obviously some things that people can do which are more risky than others, right? And investing, putting all your money into crypto, for example, is probably more risky than diversifying your portfolio. So when you are talking to various leaders about risks, what is your general approach to risk, and how do you think about it? Because people come to you for a lot of different reasons around risk. How do you kind of guide them through this?
Well, let's start with the baseline. Why are we uncomfortable with risk? Why do we push it away? There's two very sound reasons. First, it makes us vulnerable. Risk gone poorly, it creates a level of vulnerability. Nobody who's emotionally healthy desires to be vulnerable. So it's understandable that we want to keep it at distance. There's a second reason. We've been socialized since childhood to see risk as negative, right? We start very risk inclined, no ability by which to manage it. We don't get to a level of brain maturity till our mid-20s to start to have something roughly akin to judgment so we can manage the natural risk inclination we have. Where does that take us? We've got, when we were children, when we're adolescents, when we're young adults, we still have a high risk inclination and we don't manage it well. The outcome is that. Two things. One, bad things happen. Two, the authority figures in our lives have to continually suppress our risk inclination. They've done us a favor. Parents, grandparents, coaches, teachers, whoever has authority in our lives are continually saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. What's the message we receive? Don't take a risk and you'll be okay. So where I'm going with that is when I talk to leaders, I tell them, you don't have to be highly risk inclined. What you have to do is be able to master the risk equation. The risk equation has two simple components: identifying the risks that will allow your organization to achieve its goals and implementing them effectively. And that is the job for any senior executive. That is their task, independent of what industry they're in. If they can do that well, they're highly likely to be successful. If they have a high risk inclination and they don't know how to implement, they're going to be a struggle. If they're great implementers, but they don't have the vision to identify the risks that are going to allow them to achieve their goals, they're going to be struggling. So that's the core approach. But it's a very important thing, Jacob, when you think about innovation, and obviously you don't innovate without risk. Innovation, people like to say, well, we have an innovative organization. As you know, you go to companies' websites and about 50% of them have the word innovation or innovate or innovating somewhere in their website, something they like to claim, which is fine. It's a nice goal. The reality is innovation only occurs at the personal level. It's only when you give a person the permission, we call it a culture of permission to take risks within the appropriate boundaries, within the appropriate guardrails, and either individually or as a group pursue an initiative, accept the uncertain outcomes, give them latitude to pursue it in their own way. That's the only way you're going to get the initiative that's ultimately has the potential to have a dramatic positive impact for the company.
What about downside though? Because that's the other thing, right? I suppose there's different types of risks. Like, sometimes when I'm even talking to my kids or talking to different people around business or work, the conversation of, well, what's the worst that can happen always comes up, right? What's the worst that can happen if you're skydiving? Well, you die. What's the worst that you can happen if you take, $10,000 and invest it into a business? Well, you lose the $10,000, but you're still going to be okay. So there's constantly this conversation of not just should I be risk averse or not, but it's what's the potential downside and mapping it with the potential upside. So how do you think through that? Because I haven't come across any leaders who are completely, I'm not going to do anything risky ever. There are just some who are more focused on the potential downside, and that's what keeps them from making any kind of change or investment. And there are others who are aware of the downside, but are more focused on the potential upside. I don't know. Is it just maybe just a psychological shift is how you think about it?
Well, a couple of comments there. Jacob, in every organization, there's instigators and mitigators.
Yeah.
There's instigators that have a bias for action. There's mitigators that have a bias for analysis. Both are vitally important. A healthy organization has a balance of both. Senior leaders' job is to make sure those energies are appropriately channeled so that it works best for the organization. So that's item number one. Item number two, we have specific tools that we use with executives to what we call de-emotionalize the risk process. Because risk makes us vulnerable, it hits us in the gut, and makes us uncomfortable. Yeah. To the extent we can intellectualize it and de-emotionalize it, we're going to make better decisions. Towards that end, specifically with what you're talking about, when we're looking at an initiative that they're considering, we go through a process of identifying an ideal outcome, a most likely outcome, and a total fail. Okay? Then, with those identified and with percentages assigned to the likelihood of each occurring, we go through a very thoughtful and ongoing process of generating what we refer to as POSSUMs. POSSUMs is an acronym. Possibility of Success Enhancement Measures. Possibility of Success Enhancement Measures. Their job as a senior executive is to engage all the people that can provide them with good ideas that are going to do two important things. increase the chances of a positive outcome and decrease the chances of a negative outcome. Then, back to your question, what's the worst thing that can happen? It's there, but what we do is we work on minimizing it to where then they can look at it and say, okay, the worst case before we started this process was 30%. We've now gotten the worst case likelihood to down to 5% likelihood. Am I comfortable with that? And commonly what they'll say is yes. But you continue that process throughout the entire implementation. My point is this: risk-taking doesn't need to be frightening, but you have to do it in a thoughtful, methodical way.
Yeah, the percentages is interesting too, because how do you determine the percentage of a certain risk from happening or not?
Well,
I mean,
what
I
I'm
guess,
going to tell you is, the things that we're commonly analyzing in an environment like this are things like changes in organizational structure, changes in market, changes, expansions and contractions, acquisitions, dispositions, facility issues, changes in financial capital sources, things of that sort. I will tell you, a CEO has a pretty instinctively good idea of what is ideal, what's best, what's intermediate, and what's a worst case outcome. It's not critically important that, say, the distribution is 30%, 60%, and 10%. What's important is we're driving to make sure that everything other than the worst case gets bigger.
okay.
And part of what I strongly encourage them to do is make sure they engage people who are not in their company and not in their industry, because they'll get ideas that will never have occurred to them by going more broadly.
Okay. So in today's world where things appear to be changing faster than ever, right? The conversation of AI is everywhere, as I'm sure a lot of the companies you
Right.
work with are coming up. How should we be thinking about risk differently? And should it be different today than it was, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, where it felt like things were a little bit more slower moving and stable? But today it seems like every month something new is happening. Whether you look at progression with AI, whether you look at the current administration and tariffs, whether you agree with them or not, it's a change, it's a disruption, right? It just feels like there's constantly something new that's happening, and so it becomes very challenging as a business leader. How do you navigate that world, and how do you think about risk in that world? Because I mean, you can make an investment in something, there's a new change happening in the world, and all of a sudden, you're in trouble.
My comment is you have to be agile because the pace of disruption is accelerating, and we are well past the point where you can come up with a business strategy and just assume that's going to serve you well in the long term.
Yeah.
So my point is, you have to have a constant mindfulness of what's taking place in your space that has the potential to change your world, to make you less or more competitive, and you have to be prepared to implement change. One of my observation is, one of the things we learned through COVID is that we can impose a higher pace of change than we thought we could. Now, it didn't necessarily make people happy or comfortable, but where I'm going with that is, I firmly believe that the organizations that have accepted the fact that there's a higher rate of change, similar to what we experienced with COVID, in order to adapt to it, are being more successful. The ones that are trying to revert back to where things were previously are at a significant disadvantage. So
Yeah, it's interesting to
the
see.
bottom line is there's no comfort.
Yeah. Okay. So everybody should get rid of the idea of being comfortable in today's world. So let's talk a little bit about how to think through risk. So I don't know, a very simple classic example, right? I'm a business leader and I'm trying to figure out if I should make an investment in a particular area or not. It's going to require significant resources and time. However, I can stay with what I'm currently doing, which feels safe. We're currently generating revenue from it. Everything is stable. But it doesn't unlock any new opportunities or possibilities, and what it's going to look like in 3 to 5 years is uncertain. So if a leader comes to you and they say, "Hey, Jim, we're trying to figure out if we should be doing X, Y, Z or not doing X, Y, Z," what is the framework or the series of steps that you go through to help them evaluate? Because obviously, not every risk makes sense to go after. All right, some risks are good to avoid in certain situations. So what's the framework or the series of steps that you go through to evaluate if something is worth going after or not?
Well, first off, there's almost an inevitability that there's more opportunities than there's capital and bandwidth to address. So the first thing we do is say, okay, what are you presented with? What are you tempted to consider? And how many of them can you take on at one time? We then go through an analysis with a tool we call a risk assessment success enhancement tool. And we subject those various opportunities to an initial evaluation of what's the potential return on investment, what can be done to maximize the chances of achieving that, and then step back and say, okay, now of all those opportunities, which one seems like the one we should pursue first? Then we go deeper with that one through the levels of analysis I spoke to you about, and so much of that is about broadening, casting a broad net, and then implementing very methodically through the process. Now, it is important, the senior executive's role, and I touched on this earlier, but I want to go further, is to create the guardrails within which the risk-taking process occurs. What are the guardrails? Their decision-making authority, their budgetary authority, their reporting requirements, and their objective that has to be achieved. All of that has to be in writing so that there's absolute clarity. But here's the dynamic part of it. We talk about disruption being functioning at a higher pace. During that whole process, Jacob, the senior executive's role is to continually either expand or contract those guardrails based on the performance that they're observing. Not to dictate the process, not to micromanage, but to say, okay, you all are doing a good job. I'm going to throw a little more money at you. I'm going to give you a little more authority. Or it's clear to me you're struggling. Let's tighten it up a bit. Let's make sure we get to the desired outcome. That's where the senior executive fits in. But critical to that is make sure that they don't micromanage the process. Give the people involved the latitude to engage their skills and their imagination.
One of the things leaders always say, I want to create an innovative team. I want to create a team where my employees come forward with ideas, where they're not scared of risk. But oftentimes, as I'm sure you know, saying that versus actually doing that is different. So as a leader, and we can kind of come back to how leaders should be thinking about risk, but as a leader, how do you encourage your employees to take risk to drive innovation? Because obviously you can't just say it. What does the environment need to look like? What resources? I mean, do you teach them about risk? What do you do to get your employees to take risk in a smart way?
When I'm working with CEOs, Jacob, I have them do a self-analysis, and it involves 4 critical questions. 1, are you communicating the desire for constructive risk-taking innovation? Part of that is there even a definition as to what it is within your organization? Otherwise stated, if I went to your leadership team and said, do you know what what the innovation is that you're being asked to pursue? And they look at me like I have no idea what this guy's talking about. Clearly, a definition is necessary. And it's important to understand there's a different definition of innovation and constructive risk-taking in different parts of the organization. Probably your product development people, your marketing people, your sales people, you want them to be taking more risk. If you have a lot of people that are forward deployed and they need to do things in a fairly uniform fashion and there's a high risk injury, you don't want them to be innovating at the same level as the people that are more of a leadership level. That's step 1. Are you clearly sending the message you want the innovation? Next, are you encouraging it? That's step 2. What that means is, are you providing the capital, the funding, and the time allocation, and the resources to pursue the initiative? If you're starving it of resources, obviously it's not going to succeed. If you're starving it of talent, it's not going to succeed. Can you genuinely say you're giving it all that's necessary for it to potentially be successful? Step 3, are you rewarding it when it occurs? Institutions get the behaviors they reward. That's a quote from Jim Mattis, who was the Secretary of Defense. Institutions get the behaviors they reward. The bottom line is this: if you're not rewarding the desired behavior, you're not going to get it. So where that comes out is, it doesn't necessarily mean remuneration, because recognition can be quite powerful.
Yeah.
It can get to a level of periodic remuneration, compensation adjustments, advancements, so forth, and growth opportunities and more challenges. Okay, that's level 3. Step 4, what happens when it doesn't work? This is vital, because everything else will go away if you don't do this well. The question is, does it inure to the detriment of those involved if the desired outcome is not achieved? But think about this, Jacob. If you've got a good idea, it gets a green light, it gets the resources and the resources and the decision-making authority and the time, the bandwidth in order to pursue it, and it's not successful, I would tell you it is almost certain it either was not a good idea to start with, or what happened is during the implementation process, There were changes in the marketplace and changes in the competitive environment that led to it not being successful. So the question I pose to you is this: if you only reward the people for whom that effort is a commercial success and not the people for whom it wasn't a commercial success for no fault of their own, I'm not talking about poor performance, I'm talking about good performance, but it wasn't commercially viable, think about where that's going to take you.
Yeah.
You're not going to get the innovation you're looking for. So those are the steps. Is there clarity? Are you asking for it? Are you supporting it? Are you awarding it? And how do you respond when it doesn't work?
Yeah, those 4 questions I think are an interesting. I think it's a good high level framework for people to follow. So, if you're trying to get your employees to innovate, you kind of just walk through those 4 things, make sure you're doing something. Is there ever a situation where you're doing those 4 things and it's still not happening and there could be something else? Like it's a cultural barrier, it's, I don't know, something else on the team, or is it usually one of those 4 things that's not present?
Absolutely. One of the things we do with the senior executives, one of the first things that we present them with is the opportunity to evaluate their personal risk quotient. It's a concept we developed here at the Institute. It's RQ. It's like an IQ or an EQ, but it's the difference is a higher number isn't better. It's on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high. And they go through a process of evaluating the 9 different components to their RQ. And 50% of the time, approximately, it's different from what they thought it was. Why is that important? You might have a CEO who's highly risk inclined. You might have a CEO who is highly risk averse. You also have the whole leadership team. To everybody to understand where they are on that spectrum is very important, because it will dramatically influence how they approach opportunities. You've got risk-taking styles that are focused on be a high initiative. You have people that are very extremely cautious. They're all vitally important. As I stated a while back, you've got instigators and mitigators. It's the senior executive's job to make sure you put them all together. If you have a problem, then you know where they're coming from and how it's influencing it. What we know is this: sociology tells us that a trait that is uniformly present in a group of individuals will be amplified. A trait that is uniformly present in a group of people will be amplified. What that means is, if you have a lot of people, 2 or 3 people, 4 or 5, whatever the number is, and they're all risk inclined, they will feed on each other. Okay.
Yeah.
If you have a handful of people that are all risk averse, they will feed on each other in the opposite direction. Part of the job as a leader is, when they're forming teams and they're forming task forces, is to be thoughtful about that. You may want the amplification or you may not want it. Wherein you want to have more of a balance between those that are risk inclined and those that are risk averse. But if you find, and this was a classic comment I got from a CEO. He was talking about his product development team. He said, they never do a good job if I'm not in the room. Thinking, what does that tell you? You're the only one that's offering ideas and they're implementing. You haven't given them permission to offer ideas. Second related comment, Jacob, when I'll ask a CEO, are you the sole instigator within your organization? Are you the one that's the idea person and the visionary? And they'll say, yeah. I said, how's that going to work when you decide to retire? What's going to be left of the company if you're the only person that does that?
Yeah, nothing good. Nothing good. You brought up an interesting point as well, and what happens when things go wrong. So when you think about risk, when you make investments, they don't turn out the right way. What you do during difficult times is probably more important than what you do when you make the investments and things are great. So what should you be doing when things don't go the right way? And have you do any examples or stories come to mind? Because, and I suppose it depends on the type of risk that you make as well, right? I mean, it could be a risk, a couple $1,000s. It could be, we bet the business on this and it didn't go well and we went bankrupt and now we have nothing. So I suppose the scale of the risk matters with kind of the, what you do when it goes wrong. Well,
first off, in the risk assessment success enhancement process, we get to where there's a reality check, which is if the worst case is not acceptable, you don't move forward. If you haven't gotten it down to a level you can live with, you don't move forward. I would strongly advise somebody not to bet the company. They may be in a situation where they have no choice, but that is rarely a good idea. The answer is, I'm going to use a word that'll probably surprise you. What I tell senior executives is when it doesn't work, you should celebrate it. And what I mean by that is say, well done, didn't pay out the way we wanted. What can we learn from it? What are the lessons? Obviously, we don't want to repeat this. And I want to go further with this. And this idea came from a CEO because we were going through analysis of what happens when it doesn't work. And they said, we're really quite good at that. I said, well, that's interesting. What is it that you do? He said, every month on Friday afternoon, we knock off a half hour early. We open a keg of beer and we stand around and we have what we call a failure party. And we talk about what didn't work in the previous 30 days. And we talk about what can we learn from it. And it starts at the senior executives say, I tried this and boy, that was not a great idea, but here's what I got out of it. And it permeates the organization. Clearly send the message. We cannot be the competitive organization we need to be if we expect everything to work the first time.
Yeah, you also mentioned something interesting as far as when things don't work, to celebrate it. And before that, you said that you should never take a risk if you can't tolerate what the maximum downside is.
Correct.
And so I think that is a very important distinction that a lot of times people don't think through. They maybe think through what the potential downside is, but they say, that's not going to happen. We should be fine. But you never know when it might happen. So it sounds like in your kind of framework, if you can't tolerate the worst potential downside, you should not be doing it.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Or the way I put it is this: can you live with the worst case? And they'll say yes, oftentimes, or no. Said, you've now got the worst case, likelihood of the worst case down to 10%. Can you live with that? Yes or no? No. Okay, it's way too significant. Okay, then that tells you it's not yet time to move forward till you can get that down to a lower number or zero. And you can potentially do that, potentially you can't. So, but now you've got a target, you've got something to work with.
Okay, so you need to get to a level, a kind of a comfort level. So it's not that it needs to be zero, but it needs to be something that you are comfortable with. So if somebody says, hey, there's a 20% chance this will fail, but an 80% chance it can succeed. Are you comfortable with the 20% downside? And if you say no, don't do it. So it's not like you can't live with it, but it's the percentages.
Exactly right. And you just touched on a critically important part. Everything that's not in the worst case is in an acceptable case. So when you get the worst case down to 20%, 10%, 5%, the balance is acceptable. So now you're looking at something between 80 and 90% acceptable outcomes. That starts to become pretty desirable.
Yeah. How do you get those percentages to be as accurate as possible? Because I suppose that a lot of this rests on the assumption that the percentages are accurate. So for me, for example, just use a hypothetical example. If somebody said, hey, take all your money, invest it into crypto. Like right now, cash out your 401k, your retirement accounts, put all your money into, Bitcoin or Dogecoin or something like that. And I would say, well, what's the percentage that's going to turn me into like a gazillionaire? Like
I would tell you that level of risk is going to be awful hard to quantify.
Okay.
The risks where I'm working with executives is they're talking about stuff with which they have a lot of familiarity. All likely, it's an industry they've been in for a long time. And there is an element of subjectivity. You will never get away from that. When you're saying the best case is 20% or 24% or 26%, there's a subjectivity. But at the end of the day, what it does is it takes a lot. I want to go back to what I said. By doing it in that kind of methodical pattern fashion, it makes it less emotional. We never make our best decisions from an emotional perspective. So whether it's 20%, 24%, or 26% is not as significant as the fact that now they have a methodology to continually work towards improving the good numbers and reducing the bad numbers.
Okay. And then you also mentioned something interesting, which is an area that you have familiarity in. So for me, let's say, I do this kind of work. I write books, I speak and stuff like that. And somebody says, hey, you want to open up a coffee shop? I'm like, I don't know anything about coffee shops or retail or restaurants. So in that kind of situation, it becomes much more difficult for me to quantify the risk outcomes, right? So I kind of have to rely on third parties. And I guess that's where you maybe get into a little bit of dangerous territory, right? When you don't have enough information to make the decision yourself.
Well, see, Jacob, that is a perfect opportunity to then engage the possums process, the possibility success
Okay.
enhancement measures. Because obviously, if you're going to do that, you would go find three people that have been successful in coffee shops. You'd find three more that were not unsuccessful. And you would go to people that have no expertise in that realm to see what they can tell you because you want the perspective of somebody who's intelligent, successful, and has no familiarity with it because they're going to give you different ideas also. So that's about casting that broad net to get the possums that are going to help you to be able to make a good decision. Doesn't mean you're going to go forward, but you're going to make a well-informed decision.
Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. I play a lot of chess as well. And so even when I play a game of chess, right, there's always risk with any move that you make, things that you might miss. You double check, you triple check, you try to calculate, you try to look at the entire chessboard, but inevitably you always miss something in a game of chess. So when you're thinking about risk, how do you think through the different variables? Because it seems like it's impossible to think through everything, right? Every scenario, every possibility, every outcome. I know you mentioned those three kind of framework, the three scenarios that you think through at the very beginning, but within each of those scenarios, you have different variables to consider too, right? So how do you make sure you don't miss anything? And when you do miss something, how do you react?
Well, for one thing, you're not going to, there's no possibility that you're going to capture everything. But you have to be able to continually adapt through the process. And that's why what I tell leaders is when you're implementing, it is your responsibility to create a forum whereby you're soliciting more possums, being the following. The discussion is this. This is what ideas we came up with last time. This is what we've implemented. This is what we're going to set aside because perhaps it's no longer relevant or it's not timely or maybe it wasn't a great idea. What are the new ideas? And continually drive and drive and drive to the desired outcome. You will never be able to catch everything, certainly not up front. Here's an example. I had the opportunity about 6 weeks ago to do a presentation for the United States Air Force. They're in the process of rebuilding some of the air bases in the Pacific that were used 80 years ago. Well, obviously, they need a lot of work. And you have an extremely challenging environment, limited supplies, the logistics are horrendous. Bottom line is, whatever your plan is, Jacob, whatever their plan is, it will not play out as intended. Then the only question the question I put to them is, when you start to stray from intended plan, is that a bad thing or a good thing? Is that a setback or an opportunity? And that's where and obviously you can tell where my bias takes me. You have to see it as the opportunity that it is and figure out how you can exploit it to your benefit. So you're never going to, there's subjectivity. You're never going to identify in advance everything that can possibly go wrong, which is why you have to be agile.
Can you stress test a risk?
I'm sorry?
Can you stress test a risk? So kind of
I don't
put,
know. That's a good question, and I don't know.
okay. Because I was trying to figure out if there's a way to stress test different situations or scenarios or environments. And maybe with the use of AI, that's one thing that we didn't talk about. Maybe through the use of AI, you can kind of run these different scenarios and frameworks through like a chat GPT or something like that. But are you finding AI is playing a role in risk, either in investing in it or using it as a tool to help you think through risk?
I can't speak as far as investing in it. I can't speak to that. As far as using it as a tool, yes, potentially as a tool for information gathering. It is not a tool for decision making. It's a tool for gathering information potentially more efficiently than it was available. But as we all know with AI, you then have to validate everything that you're being provided.
Yeah. So I suppose that's a risk in and of itself, right? Is over relying too much on AI as opposed to kind of the human decision making piece. What are your thoughts on those two elements there? Because you just mentioned that you can't rely on AI for the decision making, but I feel like a lot of people in today's world are relying on AI for decision making, and they're kind of outsourcing their critical thinking, they're outsourcing their risk assessment, their judgment, and they're kind of killing that part of their brain, which is so crucial, right? I mean, even in your think of skydiving, for example, right? I mean, if AI is telling you, hey, Jim, everything is safe, you're good to go, but you don't have somebody manually inspecting the parachutes, like you said, every 180 days and making sure there's not a problem, you have to have that element in there as well. So what do you see as kind of this balance between the AI world and the human world? I don't know if you've thought through that or you get questions on that.
Well, I firmly believe that you can never eliminate the human component in the when we're talking about high level decision making, stuff that's rudimentary, what we know is AI so far is good at the repetitive tasks. It's good at gathering information, but you certainly have to vet that information. But I think it's just a matter of time till we're going to hear some pretty dramatic stories of people that deferred their decision making to AI to their detriment.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. And the bottom line, you've got to be courageous. Courage is not about being free of fear. It's about accepting the fear that's involved. So you have to be able to accept that you cannot isolate every variable. You cannot eliminate every potential downside. And there comes a point when you have to say this. And I asked this question of executives when they're evaluating their level of spiritual risk inclination. Think about that, spiritual risk inclination. What I asked them to evaluate is their comfort level in trusting something they can't fully validate. Think about that. In trusting something you cannot fully validate. And ultimately, there's a leap of faith that has to be taken because it is highly unlikely you'll be able to isolate every variable.
What about when it comes to misjudging risk? Because, you can go through these frameworks and these models and all the different things that you've mentioned, but you can also misjudge and just be so far off. Has that ever happened where you've kind of gone through the process and you thought something had a 10% chance of happening and it was like 80% chance?
I would say that is extremely rare if there's
Yeah.
if there's a reasonable level of knowledge.
Okay, so if there's a reasonable level of knowledge, usually if you kind of go through the process and think through it in a thoughtful way, you're not really misjudging the risk.
If you and I, Jacob, decided tomorrow we're going to go open a shipyard and try to build ships, we'd be at a profound disadvantage because neither of us know. I presume you don't know much about building ships. And I
No,
certainly
no.
don't. So would there be an opportunity to make a really bad decision there? Yeah, absolutely. But we're not we're not dealing with people that are that far afield from their level of expertise.
Yeah. Okay. So it seems like the recurring theme of kind of staying in your proverbial lane when it comes to making decisions related to risk is an important element here.
I'm not sure I'm really comfortable with that characterization. I would just say that you need to be able to leverage your expertise, but I would say that's different from staying in your lane. People that have learned that they're really good visionaries, that they can kind of see around the corner. I deal with a lot of people who are serial entrepreneurs, and they're in a bunch of different industries because they've learned their skills apply in a variety of settings. So that's why I wouldn't necessarily use the term stay in their lane.
And I know we only have a few minutes left here, so maybe just one or two questions before we wrap up. Why is it bad to just avoid risk? So why is it a bad idea to just say, well, you know what? My business is doing well. We're comfortable. We're going to keep just doing the same thing that we're doing. Everything's great. Why do I need to get involved with risk, Jim? That seems, risky. I don't need to do it.
Well, one of the greatest risks we can take is to avoid taking the constructive risks will serve us well. But to answer your question, the reason that's a bad strategy is there is a certainty that at least some of your competitors are going to be taking risks that are going to put them at an advantage with time. If you're choosing not to do that, it is just a matter of time till you'll be overtaken by your competitors. It's real simple.
Okay. So simple and straightforward. If you don't do it, somebody else will.
Correct.
All right. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on when it
I
comes
want
to
to go
risk?
back to something you kind of alluded to early on, like when you said you were talking about your kids and various risk types, getting in a car and stuff like that. There's something we talk about called the spectrum of risk. It includes three components. Mandatory risks. Those are risks that we feel we are convinced ourselves we have to take. Get out of bed. We have to sign contracts. We have to get in a car. We have to fly in an airplane. All the risks that we feel that we have to take. Among those might be risks like having children, buying a house, so forth and so on, getting married. Okay, then we get into the chosen risks. This is where we're now expanding our comfort zone. We're saying, I don't have to do that, but I desire to do that. Recreational activities commonly fit into that category.
Yep.
Okay. Business realm, it's expansions and acquisitions will fit into that category. Signing leases, signing contracts, making commitments to your customers. Then we have the avoided risks. That's the stuff that we are choosing as of now not to take. The important thing I want you to take with you is this. Anything that's in that avoided category we will often see as more threatening than the other two categories. Why is that? Lack of familiarity, because we're not currently taking it. The example I'm going to give you is the following. I can prove to you statistically the most dangerous part of a day of skydiving is driving to and from the airport.
Interesting.
And I'm not suggesting people should skydive. What I'm just saying is make sure it's very common that a risk we're not taking, we may see as more threatening than it legitimately is based on statistical analysis.
Yeah, and having the data around it is also important. Flying is a great example, right? So many people are scared of flying and they get nervous during turbulence. But then when you tell people that it's the safest mode of transportation and you have a much higher risk of getting in a car accident than you do being in an airplane, a lot of people don't know that and they don't think through that. And then when you kind of have the data, it's comforting when you have the data.
Correct.
Which I think makes more sense. So yeah, that's a very valid point. Anything else about risk that you think people need to know about that we didn't touch on?
Well, risk managed well serves us well. Risk managed poorly can definitely work against it. It's profoundly powerful. I equate it to fire. Fire can heat the house, it can burn down the house. It's a matter of deploying risk thoughtfully and intelligently, so it will be an opportunity for both personal growth and organizational growth. You have to do it. You don't have a choice. You will just. Here's one of the questions I commonly pose to CEOs. 2, can you be in business without taking risks? Obviously, the answer is no. Secondly, is there such thing as a risk-free life? The answer is no. The question is, how well are you going to use it?
Yeah, simple and straightforward. Well, we went through quite a few frameworks and practical examples here, so hopefully people can apply some of those questions and models that you shared. Jim, where can people go to learn more about you and anything else that you want to mention for people to check out?
Well, much of what we've discussed is in The Power of Risk, my book, The Power of Risk, which is available in whatever format people like, whether it's print, ebook, or audiobook, on Amazon. And then the website for the Institute is risks, plural, -institute.com. And that gives an opportunity for contact information and extending the conversation.
Sounds good. Jim, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. Really appreciate it.
Well, Jacob, I appreciate your very thoughtful comments and questions. So it's a good discussion.
Likewise. And thanks everyone for joining. See you next week.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Ready Leadership. If you want to get access to more content on how you can become future ready, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. It's thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for listening or watching, and I will see you next time.